On Friday, July 3rd, President Duterte signed into law the controversial Anti Terrorism Act of 2020. This act passed the legislature of the Philippines despite mounting opposition from many, especially from the critics of the Duterte administration. A large number of lawmakers and public officials were in support of the act due mainly to the threats of terrorism in the country. Some believe that this law could be abused and might be used by the government to quell political dissent and critics of the administration. Supporters of the act reasoned that this law is useful in fighting terrorism, which is typically carried out by highly organized and well funded organizations that are aimed at destroying the established government. But what does the Anti Terrorism Act provide? What are its key provisions? The intent of the Anti Terrorism Act, or the Republic Act number 11479, is to protect life, liberty, and property. The Act cautions that nothing therein shall be interpreted as a curtailment, restriction, or diminution of constitutionally recognized powers of the executive branch, and that it shall not prejudice respect for human rights, which shall be absolute and protected at all times. Terrorism is defined in the Act to include the following: engaging in acts intended to cause death or serious bodily injury to any person or endangers a person's life. Engaging in acts intended to cause extensive damage or destruction to a government or public facility, public place, or private property. Engaging in acts intended to cause extensive interference with, damage, or destruction to critical infrastructure, developing, manufacturing, possessing, or acquiring or using weapons, and releasing dangerous substances to cause fire, floods, or explosions, etc. The penalty for terrorism is life imprisonment, with no possibility for parole. Threats to commit terrorism is also punishable by 12 years of imprisonment. The Anti Terrorism Act expressly recognizes that terrorism does not include advocacy, protest, dissent, stoppage of work, industrial or mass action, and other similar exercises of civil and political rights. Other prohibited criminal acts are planning, training, preparing, and facilitating the commission of terrorism and the conspiracy to commit terrorism. The penalty for these offenses is life imprisonment. A person may be charged of terrorism regardless of whether such person is in the Philippines or abroad when the terrorist acts were committed. The Act allows surveillance of suspects and wiretapping of private conversations. For this purpose, a law enforcement agent must apply for a written order to the Court of Appeals to authorize wiretapping or to compel a telecommunication or internet service provider to produce customer information. Before issuing an order, the Court of Appeals must examine the application and determine that there is probable cause that the acts of terrorism have been committed or about to be committed, and that the evidence needed for conviction will be obtained. Intercepted and recorded communication will be deposited with the court, and the law enforcement agent must sign an affidavit identifying all the materials and communications intercepted, and if there are copies thereof, that all of those items shall be accounted for and deposited with the court as well. Violation of this requirement carries a prison term of 10 years. The materials deposited with the Court of Appeals could only be released and used by order of the court upon application by the Department of Justice. Any person that is arrested under the Anti Terrorism Act may be detained without a warrant of arrest for a period of 14 days, which could be extended to up to 10 days. Immediately after an arrest, the arresting officer must notify in writing the judge of the nearest court and stating the specific facts of the time, the date, and the manner of the arrest, the location of the arrested person, and the physical and mental condition of the person. The arresting officer must also copy the Anti-Terrorism Council and the Commission of Human Rights of the written notice given to the judge. A violation of this notification requirement has a penalty of 10 years of imprisonment. A person under custodial detention under the Act is entitled to certain rights, in particular, the right to be informed of the nature and cause of the arrest, the right to remain silent, and the right to have a competent and independent counsel. If the detained person cannot afford a legal counsel, then the Integrated Bar of the Philippines and the Public Attorney's Office shall be contacted immediately to provide legal assistance. These rights cannot be waived unless the waiver is made in writing and with the assistance of a legal counsel present. Violation of any of these rights carries a penalty of 10 years of imprisonment. The acts of torture and coercion and prohibited acts relating thereto are not permitted under the Anti-Terrorism Act. Any evidence obtained through illegal acts are inadmissible in any proceeding and will expose the officers obtaining this evidence to criminal penalties of imprisonment. The Anti-Terrorism Act also allows for the examination of bank accounts of certain individuals and organizations that were issued an order of proscription. This order is issued by the Court of Appeals upon application by the Department of Justice. The Anti-Terrorism Act establishes the Anti-Terrorism Council, or the ATC, which is chaired by the Executive Secretary of the Executive Branch. The Vice Chair is the National Security Advisor, and the members of the ATC are the following: the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, the Secretary of National Defense, the Secretary of Interior and Local Government, the Secretary of Finance, the Secretary of Justice, the Secretary of Information and Communication Technology, and the Executive Director of the Anti-Money Laundering Council Secretariat. The ATC shall implement the policies of the country against terrorism. It shall keep records of its proceedings and its decisions. The ATC is also given the authority to designate terrorist individuals and organizations pursuant to the decisions of the United Nations Security Council Resolution number 1373. Any additional designation may be made by the ATC based upon probable cause. World. Many challenges are facing the government. Terrorism is one such challenge for which organized governments do expect to spend resources to stop it. Terrorism is a complicated challenge. It goes beyond national border. It is well funded and it is highly organized. In order to successfully address the threats of terrorism, law enforcement and national security authorities must be well equipped not only with the technical resources but also with the legal mandate and be able to curtail certain individual rights for the greater purpose of preserving peace and order and for the survival of the state. At the same time, ironically, governments must be prepared to protect human rights and privacy. There is a delicate but very important balance to be made. A great leader not only recognizes it, but more importantly, sees where that balance should be.